Solutions. We are a small nonprofit in the city of Worcester, committed to promoting a culture of peace in Worcester and beyond. We teach a class in peace building at one of the city schools, and we host educational events like this one that spotlight examples of nonviolent solutions to domestic and international issues. Our focus is on applied nonviolence. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping details. This is a Zoom webinar, and that means for those of you unfamiliar with the platform that unlike a Zoom meeting, we cannot see your faces, which I regret because it's so wonderful to see the eyes and face of your audience. So as you're coming in, please feel free to do what some of you are already doing. Identify yourself in the chat box, the organization that you represent, because we do have people coming from as far away as Arizona. I want to note that Nuclear Resistor out in Arizona is with us, and we have people representing different groups. So please identify yourself. You can do that by going down on your screen and looking for the chat icon, and click that, and you should see a box that will allow you to type your name and your organization. As with a traditional lecture, we're going to have our main presenters speak, followed by remarks from U.S. Representative Jim McGovern. Then we'll have a brief Q&A, and we're asking that you please use the Q&A icon, not the chat box, for your questions. And that's also at the bottom of your screen. And you click that. You might want to take a moment to locate it now. Bear with us because of the large size of our audience. We can only field some of your questions, but we're going to try to get those that are representative of the collective interest here in our room tonight. So this by late afternoon, we had over 230 registrants, which for us was just delightful. We didn't expect that much. And such a large gathering is not possible without a lot of people working, and I want to acknowledge them. First, the working group from the center who met back in January to organize this program. Professor David O'Brien of Holy Cross, Jeff Conlin, Paul Popinchuk of the First Unitarian Social Justice Committee, the center board member Marge Ropp, and the center's chair Sean Minahan. I also want to thank the co-sponsoring organizations, Ken McDonald and all the good people at centralmass350.org, Mothers Out Front, Worcester's Regional Environmental Council, Mass Peace Action, our peace friends in Western Massachusetts at the Trap Rock Peace Center, and also our peace friends in Connecticut, the New England War Resistors League, St. Francis House, and the Voluntown Peace Trust. In our original configuration for this program, you would have gotten to see these groups because they would be tabling in the room and you would learn about their wonderful work, but we couldn't do that tonight. Last, but certainly not least, I want to acknowledge the tech people who are working behind the scenes to run this program tonight. Rochelle Perret, the center's multi-talented administrator, and Cole Harrison, tireless executive director of Mass Peace Action. Last September 2019, something small but very important happened in East Hampton, Massachusetts. A group of concerned residents came before their city council with a resolution calling for the U.S. to join the recently created treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons, the resolution said, pose, quote, an intolerable risk to human survival, since they can be detonated by design or by accident. The resolution continued. It noted the US and nuclear powers had made some commitments to disarmament back in 2000, and it noted that 122 countries had adopted this new treaty. Many were expected to sign and ratify, which would make it difficult for the US to justify, quote, its continued dependence on nuclear weapons. That East Hampton group was apparently persuasive because the council passed their resolution which not only urged federal lawmakers to sign and ratify the treaty, but called for Massachusetts to establish a citizens' commission to implement its requirements. Meanwhile, during that same month, over in the central part of the state, here in Worcester, Mass, to be precise, a group of concerned residents stood before their council members and asked them to sign a resolution declaring a climate emergency. The death and destruction wrought by global warming demonstrate the earth is already too hot for safety and justice, the Worcester resolution read, and then went on to outline what was needed to reverse these destructive trends. Like their East Hampton counterparts, the Worcesterites persuaded their council members to pass the resolution unanimously. These two events merited only momentary reporting in local newspapers, but they're notable, for they represent two emerging movements in our beloved and beleaguered country: the movement to abolish nuclear weapons and the movement to reverse our climate crisis. Tonight's program, which follows a week of virtual actions for Earth Day and a major world conference on nuclear abolition, highlights both of these movements. And I can't think of better speakers to do that tonight, Dr. Timon Wallace and Vicki Ellison, who have developed the Windmills to Warheads to Windmills initiative. Dr. Wallace and Vicki Ellison are founders of Nuclear Ban US, the campaign to implement the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons here in the US. They also took part in the negotiations for that treaty, which was adopted at the United Nations, and they are part of the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, which in 2017 won the Nobel Peace Prize. So we are enormously grateful for their work, for their presence and willingness to be with us tonight and give us not only information about the severity of these crises, but most importantly, some solutions and what we can do about it. So welcome to Dr. Timon Wallace and Vicki Ellison.
Thank you, Claire. We're very honored to be here, and we want to thank all the sponsors of this webinar and Representative Jim McGovern and his staff who've been so supportive of our campaign. And I know Jim's going to join us later, but we wanted to thank him now for being the eternal champion of all things humane and sensible that he is.
And thanks to all you Zoomers out there for joining this webinar. We promise to make it as interesting and informative as we possibly can. And there will be ample time, or at least some time at the end for questions and comments. We would love your feedback.
So hopefully you can see the screen. This is a program about Warheads to Windmills, which is a report about addressing one existential threat to humanity, namely the climate catastrophe, by using the money, brains, and goodwill currently being squandered by another existential threat to humanity, namely nuclear weapons, as Claire was pointing out.
It's also a campaign aiming to build public and political support for that transformation to happen. So Tim is going to be talking mostly about what's in the Warheads to Windmills report, and I'm going to be focusing mostly on what we can do about it.
And we're going to try to cover as much as we can in the next half hour or so, but we're definitely not going to have time to cover everything that's in the report. So I encourage you, if you haven't already seen it, to download it for free and read it yourself. There's a link at the top here, nuclearban.us/W2W. I think Claire's going to be putting it in the chat box as well. And if you have a smartphone and can point your camera at that fancy squiggly thing in the middle, apparently that will take you straight to the page.
And if we can't answer all of your questions, please do send them to us at nuclearban.us. So we have both been very concerned as parents and grandparents and human beings about both nuclear weapons and the climate crisis. Tim was inspired by a report from the UK that quantified the money and the technical expertise being sucked up by the nuclear weapons industry, whose only products are death machines that must never be used. The report found that without even moving to a different house, the same workers could be building green products to mitigate the climate crisis.
So when I moved to back to the US from the UK a couple of years ago, I searched and searched for something similar to the report that Vicky just mentioned, and I couldn't find one. So we got together a team of people to help us, and we researched and produced the report ourselves. And you might recognize from this slide that we copied the basic idea of looking at what are the jobs currently being used for death and how they could be used for life instead.
And there's a lot more jobs for life. We don't like the violent imagery of killing two birds with one stone, so we've taken to saying feeding two birds with one scone.
And you're all laughing your heads off at that, I'm sure. But since we released the report last year, a lot of things have happened. I think the report still stands up pretty well, but we've got to address some new issues. And one of them is that Bernie Sanders came out, since I wrote this report, with a whole set of figures which are different from the ones that are in our report. So we're going to come on to that, and we're going to talk about some of the other things that have changed since we last worked on this.
Just a couple of months ago, we could go to our schools and jobs and grocery stores and even get a haircut without being afraid it might kill us. Nobody could have imagined that we would all be in lockdown with a crashing economy and a shortage of ventilators and PPE. We're learning that what seemed unimaginable is in fact possible. Whether that's bad news, like the world at a grinding halt and our lives turned upside down until who knows when, or good news, like the smog clearing and the incredible altruism we've seen from the frontline workers. Nobody could have imagined either how much money the government could have magically found for bailouts and stimulus. So we're redefining what we think is possible very fast.
And as we've said, we're looking at three global threats to our planet: climate, nuclear weapons, and also unsustainable levels of inequality. And we know that these are worse than COVID-19. We will get through COVID-19 and we're going to be left with these other crises. But the good news is that we have two solutions to them that will, if we expanded our imaginations and looked at our old questions in new ways and cooperated globally to slow this pandemic, why can't we also allow, why would we allow the fossil fuel industry so much power to control our destiny? And why on earth would we still possess nuclear weapons which can obliterate everything and everyone forever?
So here's the first action that you can take right now. We want to thank Jim McGovern and some of his colleagues in Congress, especially Barbara Lee, who's also in this picture, and Eleanor Holmes Norton. These three in particular have been willing to stick their necks out on these issues, and they deserve our appreciation for that.
So I'm not sure if everybody here is able or willing, but we're hoping. We've got several of these ways that you can do something right here and right now tonight. And in this first one, we're asking you to thank Jim McGovern, Barbara Lee, and Eleanor Holmes Norton in particular, or any one of them. Their email addresses are here. They should be in the chat box. You can click on that QR code and get to Jim McGovern's website and write to him from there if you're a constituent. If you're not a constituent, you can't use those websites, and that's why we put the email addresses up, which they don't probably like us doing, but you're going to just thank them, right? So it's okay.
So if you are unable to do these actions right now during the webinar, we will make the connections available afterward. If there's one thing, oh, we're hearing other voices. What's going on?
Can't tell if our faces are showing. Hold on.
Okay, we're
unable to
other
start video.
people's-
Supposed to stopped it. I don't know, man.
Hello.
Okay, just carry on.
Okay.
I don't know.
Can you hear me?
Hopefully,
Okay.
if they can't. I don't know.
Can you hear me?
Just
Okay.
go.
Okay. If there's one thing we will all remember from this time in our lives, it is the phrase flattening the curve. We've all seen graphs like this, very dramatically showing what will happen if we don't flatten the curve, and and also, how it will affect the healthcare system capacity if we do flatten the curve. We've learned all about this dotted line, which in the case of coronavirus stands for the capacity of health services to cope with the number of COVID cases. When we cross that line, doctors and nurses have to ration supplies and patient care. They have to choose which patients will live and which will die, and they themselves are at grave risk.
So we've been told that flattening the curve means doing everything we can as a society to avoid going over that dotted line. And we're going to use that theme throughout the rest of our presentation. Because that means, first of all, spending lots of money. Never before in history has so much money been thrown at a problem like the coronavirus. The Federal Reserve Board poured trillions of dollars into the stock market, and Congress has signed off on trillions more dollars to keep families and businesses afloat.
Number two, flattening the curve has also involved a lot of rules and regulations that only a few weeks ago hardly anyone could have possibly imagined.
And number three is workers, factories, and whole companies have been redeployed to make PPE and ventilators or to develop tests and vaccines for the virus. Trump hasn't actually used the Defense Production Act to force companies to make immediate medical needs, but the fact that he has invoked it is also unprecedented.
And number four, flattening the curve depends on the cooperation and personal sacrifice of citizens doing their bit by staying home, washing our hands, and keeping 6 feet apart and all that sort of thing. So in short, flattening the COVID curve has meant four things: massive amounts of money, new rules and regulations, converting workers and factories, and global cooperation and personal sacrifice.
And we're going to use these four concepts as we go forward. We also know in the case of COVID that all of those things haven't been enough because we haven't actually spent enough money or responded fast enough or smart enough to nip this pandemic in the bud. And you see here the estimate of the number of deaths, which they projected a few weeks ago, has already been surpassed as of today.
But sooner or later, this pandemic will be over, and we'll still need to flatten the curve on the other existential emergencies, probably the same way, with massive amounts of money, rules and regulations, converting industries, and cooperating together. And you may ask why John Travolta is in this slide. We don't know either.
So let's look at what it means to flatten the climate curve. We know that we are currently on a trajectory that will warm the planet by several degrees Celsius by the end of this century if we do not change business as usual. Where in this crazy curve of a heating planet is the dotted line that we saw with the COVID example? The capacity of our planet to cope with the rising heat? Well, the truth is we don't know for sure. Only a few years ago, the magic number we were trying to stay below is 2 degrees, as in the Paris Agreement.
But then, in 2018, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which represents the consensus of hundreds of climate scientists from around the world, came out and said an increase of 2 degrees is more than the Earth can cope with. They said that unless we can flatten the curve and stay below 1.5 degrees centigrade, the risk of triggering a global climate catastrophe is just too great.
These scientists have said quite clearly that we need to avoid going above 1.5 degrees centigrade. So let's just review what that means for the United States. Currently, this country is spewing out about 6.5 billion tons of carbon each year. Trees and other natural resources are absorbing some of that. So our net emissions are approximately 5.7 billion tons. Now, to get that net amount down to zero by 2050, the IPCC is saying that we need to reduce our net emissions to around 3 billion tons by 2030.
2030, 10 years. And if you look at those numbers more closely, you'll see that the only really conceivable way to get our emissions down by that much in the next 10 years is by cutting emissions from electricity generation down to zero, by cutting emissions from transportation by 1/3 or more, plus a few tweaks that we can talk about later.
You can try juggling the other numbers around all you want, but to get 3 billion tons down to 3 billion tons by 2030, I challenge anyone to find a way to do it that does not involve moving as swiftly as we can to renewable electricity and electric vehicles.
If everyone in the United States became a vegan tomorrow, that would help, but it would not get our emissions down to 3 billion, not by a long shot.
And if everyone in the United States decided tomorrow to stop flying in airplanes, that also would help, but not nearly enough. In fact, while being on an airplane may create a big carbon footprint for you personally, taken as a whole, emissions from commercial aviation account for roughly 200 megatons, million tons out of the total transportation emissions of 1,866 million tons that you can see on this chart, if you can find it. That's less than 3% of our total carbon emissions as a country as a whole.
So is it actually possible to make the reductions the IPCC is telling us we have to make in the time they tell us we have to make them? A lot of environmentalists don't believe it is possible. And if you've seen Planet of the Humans, the new movie, you could easily think that this is all just a big scam and that making a massive transition to solar and wind and electric cars and batteries won't make us even the slightest bit safer from climate disaster than we are now. Happily, that movie is wrong.
So let's look at some numbers again. There are currently around 270 million cars on the road in the United States right now, and around 17 million new cars are sold every year. 360,000 of these right now, or in 2018, were electric vehicles, EVs. And that was an 80% increase over the previous year, which you can see in this chart if you can find it. I don't have a thing to point with. But with more government incentives and legislation requiring us to move in this direction, we can be selling 17 million EVs per year by 2030, meaning that no more gas or diesel cars are being sold in this country. That would get the remaining gas and diesel vehicles off the roads by 2050, if not much earlier. And that is the target that we're aiming for. No more cars sold in the United States that are not EV by 2030. Let's take a look at electricity. The US currently produces around 1,200 gigawatts of generating power to power our electricity needs. 70% of that currently comes from coal and gas-fired plants, 8% from nuclear, and 20% from renewables, including 6% hydro, 6% solar, and 8% from wind. Now, wind and solar have been increasing their share of the nation's electricity every year, and as with EVs, can replace the remaining coal and gas plants by 2030 if there are these incentives and government regulations in place to make that happen.
There are other key steps that would have to be taken between now and 2030 to meet the IPCC target of 1.5 degrees centigrade. There would need to be many more in the years to 2050 to reach net zero. We're not going to spend more time on this just now, but it is totally possible and totally doable to meet these targets, so long as there is the government commitment to make it happen.
So what's that going to take to do that? Here is an estimate of the costs of implementing a Green New Deal that we put in the report. It's based on a number of different sources and different assumptions. But broadly speaking, most of the estimates on what this would cost are more or less in agreement, give or take a few billion here or there, because some of these costs are relatively fixed, like how much per mile it costs to build high-speed rail, times how many miles of rail we're talking about. Some of them are more guesswork, like how much research will it take to come up with a more acceptable fossil-free industrial process for making cement, for instance. But as I said, broadly speaking, these figures come to around $3 trillion over 10 years, and that is roughly what people in the know have been saying it would cost to implement the Green New Deal. That is until Bernie Sanders came out with his massive plan costing $16.4 trillion. Now, I know these charts are full of numbers and you can't examine them in detail as we're going by, but if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see the total of Bernie's plan, 16.4 trillion. These are in billions, I mean. And if you look halfway up, across where it says total GND, and then there's a row of numbers. The first one is 300 billion per year averaging out to 10 years to 3 trillion, which is what we were just talking about. If you average that out to 30 years, which is what Bernie's figures go to, it comes to 9 trillion, which is more or less what Bernie said it would cost him for the same things that he put in his plan. But then you can see below that 9,114 billion are all these other numbers, which are the extra things that Bernie put into his Green New Deal. Now, some of those things probably should have been added into our own Green New Deal, such as the cost of making sure that workers in the fossil fuel industry don't just lose their jobs and end up on the street. But there are also other costs in there, like paying for school meals, broadband, national parks, and so on, which in my view could go in a different budget than one assigned to the Green New Deal. In any case, it looks at the moment as if that plan is not going to be the one going forward, which is quite sad.
Which brings us to our next call to action, because we still need a Green New Deal. And Joe Biden, along with most other members of Congress, still doesn't get it. He thinks a bit of investment here and a bit of tinkering there will be enough to do the trick. And he only talks about reaching net zero emissions by 2050. He never talks about cutting our emissions in half by 2030. What he proposes is simply not enough, not by a long shot. We've got to get that message through to Joe Biden. Our survival depends on it. So here's our second call to action for you.
Okay, so every time you hear Joe Biden say he's going to get us to net zero by 2050, please text, tweet, Facebook comment, or whatever else you can do to get this message across to Joe Biden. And the message is, Dear Joe, we need to cut our carbon emissions in half by 2030. That's what the science says. That's what the IPCC says. That's what our young people say. And it's their future that's at stake. So what are you going to do to make sure we cut our carbon by half by 2030? So we're going to give you a minute to do that. Again, you can, this is for later if you want to text or Facebook message, but you can also point your phone at that blob there, and it will take you to Joe Biden's website, and you can write him a message straight there.
I think what we'll do is we'll put all these links on our website, nuclearban.us, too, when we're done tonight, and put them in our blog where it says news. So you'll be able to find all this stuff if you're not able to do it now.
Thanks. Okay, so we're going to go on to nuclear weapons now and what it means to flatten the nuclear curve. Hopefully everybody here knows what a single nuclear weapon, tiny by today's standards, did to the city of Hiroshima in 1945.
We've seen how fast all the hospitals and all the morgues in a city like New York can fill up. A single modern nuclear weapon going off in a city like that would instantly kill hundreds of thousands or even millions of people. The dead would include large numbers of doctors and nurses, and of course, many or all of the hospitals would be damaged or destroyed as well.
Many more hundreds of thousands would be injured, many of them very severely. And in the case of New York, we're using this study that was done. There's been many different ones, but this one looked at a nuclear weapon coming from Russia, one that they currently have pointed at New York City, almost certainly, which would kill, as you saw, over 1 million people straight away. But of those remaining, there would be an estimated 300,000 people with third-degree burns needing very, very serious attention.
The number of burn beds that would be needed to deal with those injuries in just one city is about 200 times the total number of burn beds in the entire United States. And that's just for one nuclear explosion.
So what we're trying to say is that when it comes to flattening the nuclear weapons curve, the only way to do it is to flatten it all the way to zero. Today's nuclear weapons are orders of magnitude more damaging than the ones we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki 75 years ago, and we simply have to make sure that another nuclear weapon is never used anywhere ever.
We've been very lucky up till now. In addition to the Cuban Missile Crisis, there have been a dozen close calls that could have been World War III. and hundreds of accidents that could have resulted in detonation. How long are we prepared to go on with this madness in the hope that our incredible good luck will continue?
The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, many of you know, have a doomsday clock, and this is the history of it over the decades. It's never been closer to midnight than it is right now. In January of this year, they moved the clock to 100 seconds to midnight, and that is the closest it's been since the height of the Cold War, or closer than it's been even in the height of the Cold War in the 1950s. And that's how close the scientists think we are to having our luck run out.
But here's the good news. It doesn't have to be this way. And it's not going to take trillions of dollars, massive government intervention, or redeploying lots of workers and factories to get rid of the nuclear threat. In fact, all it takes is a decision that we don't want or need these weapons anymore, and we could simply be rid of them tomorrow. We could take them
Okay, well,
apart
it's not letting you start the video.
and
But
cross it off the list.
I gotta ask if I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
We're hearing somebody.
I can't hear them.
Hold on.
We have a new tool with which to do this, and that is the Nobel Peace Prize winning 2017 United Nations Nuclear Ban Treaty that Claire mentioned.
After decades and decades of the nuclear nations fooling around with half measures and incremental steps towards disarmament, just leading to more half measures and more incremental steps, the rest of the world finally said, enough is enough. Their voice is this nuclear ban treaty. It's time to say no. It's time to flatten the nuclear curve before it's too late.
So how does this treaty make a difference, especially when none of the nuclear armed countries have so far signed it? I think Claire mentioned 122 countries adopted the treaty in 2017. So far, 36 countries have ratified it, and another 45 have signed but not yet ratified. And those are all the countries in green on this chart. The red countries are the nuclear countries, and I'll explain later. We're going to come back to this map to talk about the other colors. But basically, all the colors in green are either in the process of ratifying this treaty or have already ratified it, and many more are likely to join them.
So here's our next call to action. Ask your member of Congress to sponsor our own Jim McGovern's bill, H-Res 302, if they haven't already. This bill calls on the United States government to support the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the Nuclear Ban Treaty. We are also calling on members of Congress to sign the ICAN pledge to support the treaty. ICAN is the Nobel Peace Prize winning organization that helped the treaty happen, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons.
And I'm going to assume that those things are in the chat box for you, and you can click or copy and paste or point your camera or whatever, and help us by supporting those, getting members of Congress onto those things. But this is where it now starts getting interesting, because there is in this treaty a clause called the assistance clause, and it reads that it's prohibited to assist, encourage, or induce in any way anyone to engage in any activity prohibited to a state party under this treaty. And that's very, very strong language. And just to remind that nuclear weapons are largely made by private companies. And there are a relatively small number of them who are international corporations making weapons, sometimes for more than one nuclear weapon country. These are some of the big ones: ACOM, Honeywell, General Dynamics, and so on. And these countries that have signed or ratified the treaty are going to be implementing the assistance clause in different ways, but they're going to be putting pressure on these companies, and they already are putting pressure on them. This is the green are the countries that are signing up to the treaty, not just Latin America and Africa, but also you can see the Middle East and Indonesia, Philippines, and all around Southeast Asia. And here we are with a map as an example of Honeywell and where all their operations are. And you can see that they're going to be affected by countries saying you can't have anything to do with these weapons.
So even if the US never signs the treaty, the companies that make US nuclear weapons are already being affected by it. Two of the largest pension funds in the world have already divested from nuclear weapons since the treaty was adopted, Norwegian Sovereign Fund and ABP Netherlands. Deutsche Bank and Resona Holdings of Japan have also divested. We can help speed things along by adding to that pressure here in the United States. Ultimately, we need to elect the politicians that are going to protect us from these existential threats. And I hope everybody's working very hard on that. But in the meantime, we can be putting pressure on them via the companies that hold so much sway over most of our politicians. So, call to action.
Support, divest, and boycott campaigns against fossil fuels and nuclear weapons. At the individual level, but also your faith community, your college, your workplace, your town or city or local businesses that you use. And here is the call to action number 4. We just put a couple links up here to information about how to get involved in these campaigns. There are many, many organizations working on this, and you can go to our website as well, to 350. But Don't Bank on the Bomb is the main source of information about the nuclear divestment campaigns, and Go Fossil Free is one of the main ones looking at fossil free divestment.
These websites can help you to find ways to increase the pressure and get the word out that nuclear weapons are now in the same category as chemical and biological weapons. The companies will find it more profitable to convert to more beneficial products and stop bribing politicians to keep them making weapons of mass extinction. As Greta Thunberg says of fossil fuels, I quote, "Our civilization is being sacrificed for the opportunity for a very small number of people to continue making enormous amounts of money." The same is true for nuclear weapons. We've been sold a myth that nuclear weapons somehow keep us safe from other countries. Tim wrote a whole book about that, which was distributed to all the ambassadors negotiating the nuclear ban treaty. These are not like other weapons where you can attack and retaliate until somebody wins. These are end-of-the-world machines. So back to feeding 2 birds with 1 scone. To flatten the climate curve, it's going to take money. It's going to take rules and regulations, laws and treaties. It's going to take converting workers and factories to green products, windmills, solar panels, batteries, electric cars. It's going to take unprecedented global cooperation, personal sacrifice, and commitment from each and every one of us to make changes in our lifestyle for the sake of the planet. And that, in a nutshell, is the Green New Deal.
So where can we get all that from? Nuclear weapons. The Green New Deal needs trillions of dollars over the next decade or more. And there are trillions of dollars already budgeted for our existing nuclear weapons programs. It's time to put that money into the Green New Deal and use it to save the planet rather than destroy it.
A Green New Deal will need lots of new laws and regulations to control carbon emissions, but the legal part of getting rid of nuclear weapons is easy by comparison. We already have a treaty, and the treaty sets out a very good pathway for the US and the other nuclear armed countries to get rid of their nuclear weapons in such a way that all nuclear weapons are abolished forever and nobody can ever build them again.
Hello.
And the Green New Deal will require scientists and engineers to design and develop new renewable technologies to improve battery storage and lots of other things. But our best scientists and engineers, many of them are busy designing and developing new nuclear weapon systems. We need these people to shift over to green technologies that can save the planet.
Finally, like addressing COVID, a Green New Deal for just the US would not be enough. We need to build strong cooperative relationships with the rest of the world, and especially with the countries most responsible for carbon emissions, like China, India, Russia, Europe, because we need to work together to get those emissions down. And those, interestingly, just happen to be the same countries that are currently pointing nuclear weapons at each other. Enough.
This is not rocket science. We can do this. Getting rid of nuclear weapons is the easiest of the challenges that we face as a planet. And by getting rid of these weapons, we can make it easier to tackle the other ones.
So here's our last call to action. Get your member of Congress to support H.R. 2419. This federal legislation is the embodiment of everything we talked about in Warheads to Windmills, shifting the money and brain power from nuclear weapons to green technologies and other urgent human needs. The bill was introduced by Eleanor Holmes Norton of Washington, D.C. Our own beloved Jim McGovern was the first co-sponsor. It's also co-sponsored by Barbara Lee of California, Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas, Jan Schakowsky of Illinois, and Ilhan Omar of Maryland. If your member of Congress isn't on that list, please urge them to co-sponsor H.R. 2419. Meanwhile, if you'd like updates on the Warheads to Windmills campaign, join us at nuclearban.us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Timon and Vicki for that very informative presentation. And now we want to welcome U.S. Representative Jim McGovern, who's joining us. And as Tim and Vicki noted, he was a co-sponsor of House Resolution 2419. I just, before I switch over to Representative McGovern, I want to say that this is filmed, so this webinar will be available for others to see if you couldn't make it tonight, or if you want to review some of the information. And please, if you could just put your questions in the Q&A box that's located at the bottom of your screen. So if some of you are doing that, some of you are raising hands, but just type in your questions if you would, please. So welcome, Representative McGovern.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay, clear?
Yes, we can hear you.
Well, first of all, it's great to see you, and I want to thank you. I want to thank the Center for Nonviolent Solutions and all the sponsoring organizations for doing this. I want to thank Vicki and Timon, also good friends, for their presentation, and I appreciate the advocacy of everybody. We're having this discussion during an extraordinary moment in human history, dealing with this COVID-19 crisis, and it's challenging to get political leaders of any political persuasion to focus on anything other than the immediate problem at hand. But we need to for a whole bunch of reasons. The Warheads to Windmills report that Timon worked on, I think helps provide us with a roadmap about how we might harness not just the billions of dollars invested in nuclear weapons, but the scientific and manufacturing expertise as well, and focus them on addressing the existential threat of climate change. It's a great tool for helping people think about the possibilities of how to create change, and that it's not impossible. This is doable. And when people talk about the money, well, this report actually helps show where the money will come from. So this is not about what's possible. It's about our political will. The COVID-19 crisis has exposed many of the deep inequities in our country between the haves and the have-nots, between those who can continue to receive a paycheck by working at home and those who must leave their homes and risk going to work in order to put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. These glaring discrepancies are also frighteningly clear in who lives and dies, who has quality health care and who does not, and who are more vulnerable based on how poor and polluted their neighborhoods were. Outside of age and an underlying health condition, exposure to air pollution and other environmental pollutants were at the top of the list for increased vulnerability, and the most affected were communities of color. So I think it will be helpful as we move forward to think more broadly about not just a straight transfer of military to green jobs and green technologies. We need to be thinking more about how we finally recognize and address the deep inequalities that have been exposed by the pandemic, and in working to eliminate them, how do we help advance the benefits of the Green New Deal to all, not in an elitist way, but one that places the concerns and priorities of vulnerable communities and people of color and their leadership front and center. Now, Congress and whoever is the next president, and I hope it won't be the current occupant, will need to make hard budget choices. Given the enormous budget and fiscal stress our country will be facing when we come out of the COVID lockdowns. The deficit will be well over $3.7 trillion in FY 2020, according to CBO, because we're borrowing all the money we're pouring into states, communities, and individual families right now. This can provide us new opportunities to talk about the military budget and nuclear spending in new ways, as well as our priorities for economic recovery. It opens doors and it forces choices. However, there is already organizing from pro-defense lobbyists, think tanks, the defense industry, and members of Congress in favor of increased military spending and maintaining those military defense-related jobs. So there's nothing easy about holding the line, let alone decreasing the military budget or even the nuclear budget. But as I said, we're going to be forced to look at things differently in terms of our budgetary priorities. And again, this moment will open the door for the kinds of discussions that we're having here today. We're also in a period which could change if we have a change in the White House. But we're in a period where we are, we're in a period where we are dismantling, as we speak, our nuclear disarmament treaties and building new nuclear weapons to use in a localized conflict. I wish I could say that the attempt to rebuild our nuclear arsenal, was just the product of this one president, but unfortunately it began even before him. He had just made things incredibly more difficult. So it's critical that we reverse direction and we put the U.S. back on the course of being a leader in arms control and nuclear disarmament rather than a rogue nation. We're currently on a very dangerous path of tearing down nearly half a century of work and hard-won agreements, and it's really unfortunate. And it is also stunning to me how easily this administration is turning the clock back. In addition, as was mentioned, Eleanor Holmes Norton's bill, HR 2419, that you talked about earlier, I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of. We also need to recognize that other members have introduced a number of bills as well to restrict U.S. nuclear first use and first strike, to support the NPT and the INF treaties, to reduce overall spending on nuclear weapons and prohibit low-yield nuclear weapons. And then there's the resolution that Earl Blumenauer and I introduced, embracing the goals and provisions of the UN Nuclear Ban Treaty, HRES 302. So right now, special interests are pushing to increase the military budget in the next emergency COVID-19 package, believe it or not. This morning, I'm proud to say that House Armed Services Committee Chairman Adam Smith came out and said that he sees no need to boost military funding in that bill. But he's going to be awfully lonely in negotiations with the Senate because they, given their majority, have a very different set of priorities. And we need to remember that the CARES Act that passed at the beginning of April, that we tried to incorporate several green elements tied to large corporate loans and infrastructure. And the Senate and the White House simply would not accept them. I mean, for example, a provision that airlines would cut emissions by 2030. And we're still fighting against bailouts for the fossil fuel industry. I mentioned these political battles to illustrate the difficulties of that we're having at this particular moment. You know, opponents of the Green New Deal have been very successful at framing it as a dangerous departure from the status quo. But the climate crisis is so severe, the costs of inaction far outweigh the costs, of saving the planet. Look, I don't know why or how they've been so effective in trying to paint a narrative that those of us who favor a Green New Deal are somehow favoring a plan that would be punitive, that would hurt average people, that would lower the quality of life of people, that would cost jobs, when in fact the total opposite is true. A Green New Deal would create countless millions of new jobs. It would improve the quality of life, the healthcare of people on this planet, as well as save the planet. Ecological collapse increased global conflict, widespread population displacement, resource scarcity, major threats to public health, and more. These are all going to be incomprehensibly costly. So if we want to be really conservative here, and we're worried about cost, we ought to be embracing enthusiastically the Green New Deal. And by the end of the century, the U.S. would need to spend an additional $500 billion a year in crop damage, lost labor, and extreme weather damages, according to the fourth National Climate Assessment. The pandemic and our current economic crisis have created even greater sense of urgency. BW Research Partnership has found that the U.S. has lost 100,000 clean energy jobs in March alone as a result of the pandemic, and another 500,000 are at immediate risk. Emissions are down this year about 6%, and smog is lifting in polluted cities, but a pandemic is not the way we want to bring down emissions. And even if this temporary reduction were permanent, it's only a drop in the bucket compared to the reduction we need to avoid catastrophe. The economic instability caused by the pandemic has actually clarified something that energy economists have been documenting for years, and that's namely renewable energy is actually out-competing fossil fuels. The only reason oil and gas industries have remained competitive is because of their intense lobbying, their subsidies they receive, and their disinformation campaign to obscure economic reality. They also are successful because they donate heavily to members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats. And I think one of the calls, I don't know whether it was mentioned or not, ought to be that, if members of Congress and members of the Senate don't want to take a no corporate donation pledge, then they ought to, at a minimum, take a pledge that they will not accept money from the fossil fuel industry and from defense companies. I think that is one way to neutralize their enormous influence in Congress. The pandemic has pulled back the curtain on fossil fuels vulnerability. Now they are pushing for a bailout, and I don't think we cannot let that happen. So instead of investing in things like dangerous pipelines, we should be striving for breakthroughs in battery storage, electric vehicles, and green manufacturing. So, look, I know people have questions and comments, but I want to thank all the groups and the individuals who have been listening to this evening, this evening's forum. And I'd love to think that Congress leads the way, but we don't. All the great movements that changed the status quo came from the grassroots, up through the neighborhoods, cities, and towns, building movements and coalitions. It's that kind of movement that forced change at the top. This is why we each and all of us have a very important role to play. I'll just close with this. I used to have a history teacher who used to end every class by saying the same thing. He'd say, the world will not get better on its own. And to be honest with you, when I was taking his class, I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. I do now. Nothing changes, nothing good happens, nothing bold happens unless like-minded people come together and demand it. We are going through a very difficult time in this country and around the world with this pandemic. But we need to focus on what happens beyond this pandemic, how we get out of it. And hopefully we will recognize the inequalities in this country for what they are, unconscionable, and actually do something about it. So with that, I thank you very much, and I yield back my time. Excuse me.
So thank you so much, Jim. Just very strong as always. Thank you, Tim and Vicky. We do have questions, and so I'll be asking some that came in the chat box. I want to add to Jim's point about inequality. The Worcester Emergency Climate Resolution that the City Council passed last September framed their recommendations in the context of inequality and called for just transition. So this would mean using this opportunity to really address some of the inequities that we're all becoming acutely aware of. So our first question, if I could just give it to Representative McGovern, because I know your time is limited, and that's coming from Anthony Donovan in New York City. He says, thank you, dear Jim, thank you so very much. Can you say exactly where the bailouts in the past weeks are going? And he specifically wanted to know, you had mentioned they're going to some of the defense industries. Can citizens know exactly where, and where do they get that information?
Yeah, well, so we, you know, last week I actually had a bill that we passed in the House that would create an oversight committee very similar to the one that then Senator Harry Truman created during World War II, in which there was a concern that all this money that was being appropriated in an effort to win the war, you know, might not be getting to where it's supposed to go, where Congress intended it. And he was concerned that it would be going to basically pad people's pockets and going to things that had nothing to do with winning World War II. And so we just passed the resolution on last week to create this committee. We need to do the oversight. You know, Congress appropriates the money. We put in the legislation certain guidelines, but we're reading every day in the newspaper that there are people who are getting money and corporations that are getting money that really don't need it. I mean, it was designed for small business relief, and yet we read that luxury steakhouse chains are getting the money. California sports teams are getting the money. I mean, so I guess an answer to the question is I don't have a full accounting of where every dime has gone, but that's what this select committee will do, and we want to expose it. There needs to be transparency because one thing we do know, this pandemic is not going to end like next week. All of a sudden, everything's done. I mean, we're being told by medical experts that it will linger, and then we might see another surge in the fall. If that's the case, you know, there's got to be multiple other packages. So we want to make sure that it's going to where it needs to go. But I don't think we should be bailing. There are those who are advocating that we bail out the fossil fuel industry right now. I mean, we're going to have to fight that. And again, I feel good that we have a strong group in the House that will resist some of this, but we have to deal with the Senate. We have to deal with the president as well.
So if citizens want to know where that money's going, like, is there some place that you can look and see the distribution, or is it
we don't have a comprehensive? Hopefully, as soon as we get a list, we will all make it public, and I will make sure that the organizers here get a copy of whatever you know, whatever we find out. But again, I mean, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of loans are being approved by the Small Business Administration, and you know, we're as of right now, I don't have a comprehensive list of everything. We've known through reporting some of the egregious examples where corporations that don't need it are taking it, and they're being shamed to give it back. But that is what this select committee is about, to make sure that this administration is not spending this money in a way that is not helping, you know, mom and pop stores and small businesses. And certainly we do not want to bail out of the fossil fuel industry. So
one more question for Jim, and then I want to give a couple here for Timon and Vicky. This comes from Mark Muhich with Sierra Club. He asks, is it better to support a single resolution? Maybe Timon and Vicky, you could also weigh in. For example, HR 2419, which has been referenced tonight, or a slate of anti-nuclear weapon bills. Which strategy is better?
I mean, look, I mean, I think people should be asked, people should ask their representatives to support not just one, but multiple bills. I mean, you know, we're going to have to at some point decide which one is going to be more likely to be able to move forward. But again, I mean, my hope is that, you know, that we can begin to have hearings and a more thoughtful discussion with hopefully a more receptive Senate and somebody who is not totally out of their mind, who's in the White House, who understands not just the importance of arms control and, you know, controlling the proliferation of nuclear weapons, but somebody who is actually open to, you know, moving the world toward abolishing nuclear weapons once and for all. I mean, we all know that if nuclear weapons are ever used, we've failed. I mean, it's a failure. It's everybody loses. I mean, the enormous loss of life, the poisoning of our environment, and you know, we know what the result of utilization of these weapons are, and yet we continue to produce them and modernize them, and try to find ways to, you know, make them more targeted. So, you know, look, I mean, let's all be honest here. The upcoming elections are going to make a huge difference. Whether we are going to do anything about the climate crisis, and whether we're going to do anything about nuclear proliferation and hopefully moving in the direction toward abolishing nuclear weapons. And I just say this, I mean, I am, you know, Joe Biden wasn't my first, second, third, or fourth choice, but now he's my only choice against Mr. Trump. The president has enormous power, and you know, this president has used it to do bad things, like pull us out of the Paris Accord, like basically say that the climate crisis is a hoax. You know, there's not a missile system that he hasn't wanted to brag about or embrace, and he keeps on making the case with no substance that we need to pour more and more and more of taxpayer dollars into building up even a bigger defense and a bigger arsenal. You know, his mindset's not going to change. So, I mean, you know, part of what has to happen here, in addition to supporting legislation to show that there's support, is we have to make sure we're electing people who are actually sympathetic. Doesn't have to be somebody who agrees with us on everything, but somebody who's at least sympathetic to the arguments that we're making here. And in many respects, this is our last chance, I fear.
Thank you. So 2 questions for Timon and Vicky. One is, has your report, Warheads to Windmills, been sent to all representatives of Congress, House and Senate? Another question asks, have you consulted with climate groups in promoting this plan? And a third questioner asks, do you have a time frame for converting from nuclear manufacturing to the Green New Deal?
Okay.
So the first
Distribution
question.
of the report. Has the report been distributed to all members of Congress?
We've done our best. We have done our best to do that.
Yeah, it's not by any means going to all of them, but we've been pounding the halls of Congress and trying to talk to them and talk to their staff and trying to get it out. Beatrice Finn, the head of ICANN in Switzerland, came, and thanks to Jim, actually, we had her speak to the Progressive Caucus in Congress, which is, I mean, there's like 100 members of Congress in total, and those are our, they weren't all there, but I mean, those are the kind of people that we're targeting in the first place, because they're, as Jim was saying, you know, we've got to start with people who are sympathetic, at least, to these issues, and many of them are not. So we're doing our best, you know, and there's lots more to do.
Yeah, we could use all the help we can get.
And the question regarding time frame, converting from nuclear arms manufacturing to green jobs, do you have any approximation of what that kind of conversion would take, a timeline?
Well, I would think in the next 15 minutes would be about right.
Yeah, I mean, we're up against the clock with all these things. We've just said in our presentation, how urgent it is that we address the climate crisis in the next 10 years, which means starting now. And the same can be said of the nuclear weapons. I mean, the fact that the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists have moved their clock closer and closer to midnight is an indication of how dangerous the situation is. And as Jim said, Trump has been, ripping up all these treaties, and the situation's getting very, very dangerous. And we need to alert people to that. But I mean, we have no control over the timeline. We want it done as soon as possible. And we know it's not going to be.
And can you say 2 words about very local level education with city resolutions that are being used by both climate activists and nuclear abolitionists? Resolutions in which people are calling for their local economies, pension funds to divest. Could you speak a bit about that? That's a tool that we haven't mentioned much tonight.
Well, you mentioned the East Hampton resolution and Worcester. Our town of Northampton has done both really strong climate Green New Deal type of things, and also on the nuclear weapons. They've committed to divesting the city pension funds, and they've put a resolution into the State House to be allowed to refuse contracts with these companies. We've got cities and towns all over the country doing this. It's very slow, and we've got some outstanding examples like Berkeley, California, and Tacoma Park, Maryland, and so on. But it's slow going, and people are hesitant. We've done a whole spate of town meetings last year in Massachusetts, passing resolutions to divest and refuse contracts with these companies. And then when we after they pass the resolution, going back to the town managers or whoever it is, they're a bit hesitant to follow through on it. So then we've got to go through another whole round of resolutions, and we've done the same with the State House. I mean, many people on the call were involved in the bills that went into the Massachusetts State House. We were quite excited about that. We gave lots of evidence, and most of them just got left in committee, and we've got to start all over again next year. So it's a very slow process at the local level as well as in Congress, but we're plugging away, and there's a lot people can do individually, and as we said, with faith communities and local businesses and so on. We've got about a dozen local shops. I mean, they're all closed now, of course, but we've got shops with little signs in the window in Northampton saying, we're aligned with the nuclear ban treaty. We're not going to have any investments or anything to do with these 27 companies. And we're hoping more people will pick up on these things. And after the pandemic, if and when the pandemic, eases off and we get back to some kind of normality, we can get back to doing those things.
But meanwhile, people can divest as individuals and tell the companies why they're divesting. People can divest as faith communities, as, for example, the Northampton Quaker Meeting has done. And then they wrote to the companies and explained why they had done that, why they weren't going to buy any products from those companies, and why they were, pulling any investments. And, we can do that at all levels. And there is some guidance for that. Don'tbankonthebomb.org is
.com.
Don'tbankonthebomb.com with no apostrophe on the don't, is a wonderful international resource, and nuclearban.us is trying to do that here in the US. We have some resources. It's a big job, educating people how to do divestment and boycotting of both fossil fuels and nuclear weapons, but it's definitely worthwhile because they need to get the message. This is not okay. They need to be stigmatized just like chemical weapons and biological weapons. This is no longer a thing that we can tolerate as a species.
All right, and we just have a couple more questions, and then we're going to stop at 8:15. I want to remind all of our participants that this is filmed and it will be on the Center for Nonviolence Solutions website, but we'll also be sharing the recording of this webinar with our sponsoring organizations. We'll try to send a follow-up email giving information on how you can access the webinar should you want to. So a question comes regarding the technology needed to make some of these changes. A participant says, I'm thinking of anti-slavery activist Kevin Bale's study about the relationship between mining and environmental destruction and modern day slavery. Should we worry about the ecological effects of mining necessary to supply minerals, components needed for the technology? Will most of these components come from developing countries, and how will that affect them? So I think this is connected to doing green technology.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, we should be concerned about mining and child labor and modern day slavery and all these things, and about the environmental consequences of doing, you know, making all the things that we need. But let's not forget that we're already doing all these evil things at the moment. And, you know, it's not a question of, you know, well, we mustn't convert to green technologies because there's all these things associated with them. We've got to fix all of these things, and we've got to work on all of these things. And we can't decide, well, we're not going to go forward to save the climate because we've got to deal with child labor first. You know what I mean? We've got to work on all these issues. And that's one of the things that was so powerful about Bernie Sanders' Green New Deal that I mentioned, is that it included a lot of things to deal with inequality, with workers' rights, but also with indigenous rights, because indigenous people have been at the forefront of a lot of these, waste, nuclear waste and mining and all the rest of it. And we have to address all these things. And, we need to use the fact that we need to transform our economy to a renewable one. We got to use that opportunity to fix a lot of other things while we're at it.
And Claire, this is Jim McGovern. If I could just say, one of the things that I co-chair the Human Rights Commission in Congress as well. If we're a signatory to the, UN, the International Declaration on Human Rights, so are a whole bunch of other countries. We need to follow what we have signed and what we are committed to. We have enormous pressure to be able to influence countries that use slave labor, that exploit their poor, that ruin their environment, if we want to. But too often, what ends up happening is we basically bow to the whims of a particular U.S.-based business interest, and we don't want to make waves. We can change that. So, again, all these, there's lots of stuff we have to work on, but we can work on them all. And by the way, the declining environment, is a human rights concern as well. And we need to address that a long time ago. And I just want to say to Tim and Vicki, call Cindy Buell tomorrow, and so you have that link to your report, and we can send out a dear colleague with the link again, urging all members to actually download it and look at it. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we want to be mindful of the time. We're so grateful to Timon and Vicki and Jim for giving us a sense of things, a sense of the dire circumstances, but also, and this is key, a sense of possibility. And I just want to reiterate, we had some great ideas come out tonight. One is to ask for our Congress people to be divesting from any funding from fossil fuels and defense industry to weaken that lobbying influence that they have. We've also talked a bit about resolutions that people can do at a super local level to divest at an individual level. people power is always available to us Americans. We may live in a highly militarized and a country full of inequities, but we have a lot of talent, a lot of creativity, a history of people power. This crisis is an opportunity for social change, and we've shown that we can do that and have done that in the past. So let's use this tough time to really demand the systemic change for the benefit of our species. Really, this is what we need. So many thanks to all, and we will go forward with these suggestions and hope we can deepen our connections. This was an educational webinar. We may be following up with more action focused in the future.
Be safe. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks.
Okay. So maybe the panelists can stay on for a few minutes.
Yep.
Sure.
I'm curious, can we answer these other questions somehow offline, or how does that work?
We could answer them in a Word format and include that with the recording, possibly.
I mean, I don't know what answer live means, but once you turn this off, it's all gone, right?
Believe
We'll
so.
save the Q&A in the chat.
Oh, it will. Okay.